Thank you, my friends. Welcome. This is a talk that Brian called many years ago a sports talk, in the sense that I'm not talking specifically about Gen Xs. I'm talking about topics that are related to Gen Xs, in my opinion, whether in the short or the long term. In the short term, for example, digital transformation, things that were very urgent and concrete, and other things I feel will end up being relevant for us but cannot be applied immediately. I remember that in 2014 I spoke about bitcoins, and I remember some of you were looking at me like saying, what is he talking about? And throughout the year, however, I'm invited to repeat my talks in many organizations, but in 2014 no one invited me until 2017, when I was invited once a week. And today, one of the fundamental tracks was blockchain. That's how I feel today, but with a different topic. It's not something immediate, but I have the impression that it will have a strong influence on all of us. Unlike bitcoins, and remember that at that moment, uh, persons didn't exist. Satoshi Nakamoto came up with a technological marvel out of nowhere. But the story I'm going to tell you today is different. That's why I called it People+Tech, because it's a story about technology and about people. A story about excellent decisions that I found very wise, people who behaved well, people who betrayed, engineers who worked for many years convinced that what they were doing was impossible. So I think that you should look at this talk from two dimensions: the dimension of technology, what people thought was impossible and still was achieved, and the people who did it. The story is about something that seemed very difficult or impossible to obtain: a self-driving car. So I want to start the story of People+Tech in 2004. DARPA, the agency of the Ministry of Defense, which is mythical for us who work in technology, developed things with a military interest, but ended up developing things for the world in general. Internet is a clear example. But at that time, in 2004, the US were at war with Iraq, and people who were dying in the desert in the jeeps was one of the biggest problems. So they tried to create a self-driving jeep, and the wise decision was that they decided not to have a long research project with a very big budget. They decided to organize a challenge which was called the Grand DARPA Challenge, and it was supposed to have drivers who would cross 150 miles in the desert in less than 10 hours, and the winner would win $1 million. So several participants intervened in the first challenge. This was the one of them, and it doesn't look like a hammer, but it's a hammer because it had so many sensors that they had to cut the roof. So Camilo was one of the participants, and he thought he could win. This one intervened with a truck. It was a self-driving truck. He doesn't even have a cockpit. And then another one who proposed a motor, and it looks like an animal to some extent, but it's a motorcycle. So the challenge started with the press, etc., and I'll give you an example of how it went. What you see here is the motorcycle that starts. It didn't even travel 10 centimeters. Afterwards, they found out that what had happened was that the guy on the motorcycle forgot to turn on the gyroscope, which would have would give him stability. If he hadn't failed, I think that today we would be driving, or we would be on self-driving motorcycles. The director of DARPA had all the press there, and all of the participants failed. Caris Mello only traveled 7 miles and was the best one until he got stuck. So it was a total failure. Imagine the director of DARPA and the headlines the next day on the press. I can imagine sports journalists saying the desert was deserted or collapse in the desert, things like that. And without consulting anyone, DARPA's director said, well, this failed, but we're going to have the same challenge next year in 2005, and we'll offer $2 million instead of one. So they changed the logo. When things go wrong, it's good to change the logo. They changed the logo, and let me introduce the participants of this new challenge. Once again, Caris Mello with the hammer. The sensors were smaller, so they didn't have to cut the roof. And Caris Mello and also Stanford University had a presentation and wanted to see whether the university had to intervene or not. And this last slide said Stanford has to intervene in the challenge, and the last one said no. So they said no to Stanford, but they participated anyway with this Volkswagen. And several participants intervened. So this one had its engine stop at 60 miles. The engine, it was a mechanical failure, nothing to do with the sensor. He tried to turn on the software, but he arrived later, and this was the winner, Stanford. For the second time, Caris Mello, who was Carnegie Mellon was the person who won, and he was asked what's the next challenge, and DARPA said we are going to have a challenge in a city, city that turned out to be an abandoned base in the US. It was called Urban Challenge, and they had to travel 60 miles in a period of 6 hours. But it was a city that had to comply with all transit laws, but would be simplified. There would be professional pilots, but no one on foot or bicycle, no dogs, no lights in the crossings. So once again, Mello decided to participate with a sponsor that was General Motors.
And so this is Cevita Hole. Stanford also enrolled, supported by Volkswagen, with a Volkswagen Passat. Who won? Caris Mello. He had failed twice, but he ended up by winning the challenge, and a little bit longer, but he did. And that's something else that is interesting, and which I felt was extremely weird. The DARPA director was asked, well, what's the next challenge? And he says, there's not going to be any other challenge. DARPA has already fulfilled its mission. And I think that was very wise, because if DARPA had continued carrying out these tests, we would have specialized cars to win DARPA's challenge instead of autonomous vehicles. And it's important to say yes, but it's also important to say no. And so to conclude this first stage of autonomous cars, let me tell you about this question of technology and person. The best, or the winner was Larda. It was something that is on top of cars. You know, all autonomous cars have something on the roof, and what they have is this LiDAR, radar, which is the eyes of an autonomous car. It's like a laser beam that measures very accurately all the objects around. That was the winner from the technological standpoint. From the people's standpoint, these were the three winners. Look at them. One of them is going to be the bad guy of the film, of the neighborhood. Who do you think it is? One of them is the bad guy. Let me introduce you to him. Sebastian Thrun from Stanford University. The second one is Chris Erbson from Carnegie Mellon University. And the other one is Lewandowski. He's the guy of the motorbike. And well, the first two were obvious. And Lewandowski was the winner because he realized that the basis of an autonomous car, lied with the sensors. And so he went up to university and he told them what he thought about sensors. So by 2008, DARPA said it was not going to make any other challenges. Volkswagen had won and the two universities had won. So they expected that all those players would continue working on autonomous vehicles. But none of them had any interest whatsoever in building the autonomous car. Not even these three people were interested in continuing with autonomous cars. Why? Because they had all drawn the conclusion that they had gone up to the top and you couldn't do more than that. No one believed that an autonomous car could be developed except for this one, Larry Page, who is Google's founder. He's the only one who said, we must make an autonomous car. He called Sebastian Thrun from Stanford University. He said, Sebastian, what I'd like to do is a car that is autonomous in California. And Sebastian said, it's impossible. We are the best. I know the best team. It's impossible to have an autonomous car. And Larry Page said, another wise decision, he said, don't say no and don't answer now. Come back tomorrow and tell me the technical reason why you can't build an autonomous car, either because of the processor, the number of neurons, LiDAR revolutions, I don't know. But say no because of a technical reason. And so Sebastian went away, came back the following day, and he said, I haven't slept the entire night, but I really don't find any technical reason why not, but you can't. So Larry knew a little bit about how to deal with engineers, and he said, all right, well, we're going to have an internal challenge in Google called Larry 1K. Now, Larry 1K meant 11 tests, 1,000 miles, and if the autonomous car ended up those 1,000 miles, well, there was a good prize for the team. I don't know what the prize was, but I know that they were all very happy when they won. So what did Sebastian do? He had to set up a team. What we know, those of us who know about sports, what's the worst thing you can do? Create the team of the stars. And he did. He created the star players. He hired Thrun, Erbson, Lewandowski, and he said, we are going to make an autonomous vehicle, and we want to win the Larry 1K. Just that. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to win. They had enough budget, and he said, give me a Prius, Toyota. That's the one they used. Let me show it in the inside. That's quite similar to any car, but let me expand one part. There it has a red button. And that red button is that in case something wasn't done, something was working wrong, then the driver would start driving. manually. So the question of the button was because of the legal department of Google, because one of the questions asked to the legal department at Google was is this legal? Can we really have an autonomous car in California? And so Google's counsel didn't say, obviously no, obviously it's illegal. They said, well, you know, we've been reading the legislation very carefully, and we came to the conclusion that it says that there must be a driver. It doesn't say that the driver must drive. Okay, very good counsel. And that's why they put that button in. Now, the thing is that they had very large challenges. All the other cars that were autonomous, they never had a human being inside. And so one of the things that happened at first is that human beings were getting dizzy, and it was too sudden, and human beings would get dizzy. So they had to go along millions of miles to do things. And a couple of months before the end, in late 2011, the guys were able to pass the 11 tests. The first one was very easy. It was to go on a track, but the last one was to drive in the city center, downtown San Francisco, where there are many ups and downs, and they were able to have the autonomous car going around downtown San Francisco, and they had no problems. They did it perfectly. Now, and then they collected the money and so on and so forth. But this Langtech and the team wasn't working very well. There was an ego fight and at that time, and something else happened. What happened is that another Google vice president who had nothing to do with this but didn't like something, he said, all right, let me see who is LiDAR's manufacturer, because they were buying that LiDAR to a company. And he said, are you the owner of this technology? I said, no, I'm not. I mean, we buy this technology to another company. And so this VP goes to the other company, and he says, and who, are you the owner of this technology? Good. And who is the owner of this company? And when he finds out who the owner of the company is one of these three guys. That is, there was one in the team who was in Google. He was buying a LiDAR radar that he was building himself, that he was manufacturing himself. Who was it? Let me make it easier. It wasn't Sebastian Thrum. These two, out of these two, Carnegie Mellon or the crazy guy of the motorbike? Yes, the crazy guy of the motorbike. Anthony Lewandowski was the one meddling around. What does Google do? Now, he's an incredible expert, and he was the one who won the Larry 1K. Perhaps if Anthony Lewandowski hadn't been there, they wouldn't have done the Larry 1K in the deadline they had. So what did Google do? Well, this is a story of good and bad decisions. Just judge this. Well, it bought its company. It paid $20 million for it. Anthony Lewandowski was extremely happy, but it was devastating for the team. Imagine, you're working with someone, he was doing whatever he wanted, and he's given $20 million for having acted not very correctly. So, well, we come to 2012. On the one hand, it had been shown that an autonomous car was possible. And in 4 years, technology had developed with no problems, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the team was very complicated, and there was a little detail there as well. Nobody knew what business model to do with this, and how can we make money out of this? What's the business model for an autonomous car? And that's a typical thing of Google. First of all, Google finds an invention, and many years later, he finds the way to make money with it. The first example was the question of the search engine. It invented it in the 90s, and until 2000 and 2001 had no clue how to make money out of it when it copied a business model from somewhere else. So we come to 2012, and the situation is there are no longer any challenges, no longer DARPA, no longer Larry 1K. He hadn't been paid. And so we go into the model as to how to look for a business model and make all this feasible. The car industry was going through two very deep transformations. One is the electric car, the one competing with internal fuel. Tesla was the first one to do it successfully. And why is this important for this story? Well, because electric cars is a simpler magnitude car. An internal combustion car has 10,000 pieces, and an electric car has 1,000 pieces. So it's far simpler and far simpler to control and to manufacture. So this means that the barrier of the number of manufacturers is much lower. There may be other manufacturers. Much easier to make electric cars than the other cars. And the other transformer is Uber, and we've already discussed it at length. It's Uber. Uber starts becoming a model of transportation which is non-traditional. So Google team had to find what the business model was. And now the first attempt was, instead of building the autonomous car with a liar on the roof and so on, let's do something that helps you to drive on the road, that it has cameras with no LiDAR, and that it can help you, that it can brake and can turn around, but it's not autonomous. And since it hasn't got a LiDAR, if there is a problem, well, the car would warn you, and there you drive it. Now, Google tries that out and comes to the conclusion that it's a very bad idea and a dangerous one, because you're not driving the car, you're bored, and you're too bored, you don't pay attention, and then you're doing something else, and then there's a beep beep, and you have to react. And Google had come to the conclusion that somebody takes between 10 to 15 seconds to get into the context when it's not paying attention, and that could be from 100 to 300 meters, too late for any problem. So the first thing that Google does is to discard that, and what happens is that Tesla comes up with exactly the same. What Google was saying was bad and dangerous, Tesla comes up with the same thing. And it tries another business model, and it tries to license technology to large manufacturers. Let's go up to Detroit and make a presentation there. They go to Detroit, they make a PPT to the board of one of the large companies. I don't want to say the name. And Larry 1K was there, and they told them about it and said, well, look, stop here. You are telling me that you had an autonomous car in downtown San Francisco. Yes, but the legal department said it was not. Well, he said, I don't care what your legal department said. Go away. And they were dismissed from the meeting. That is not the way the automotive industry works in this country, he was told. So look, they have a pilot model which was too dangerous. On the other hand, manufacturers hated Google. So what did Google do? Let's make a car. And this is the car. Do you like it? It's strongly influenced by the legal department. True story. Why? Because the legal department said, if you do something that rides at less than 25 miles per hour, then the legislation doesn't apply. They were traffic specialist, and that's the car. It was called Firefly. If you sit in the inside, I remember we saw it with Villar once. It's like being inside the living room of a house with no brakes, nothing, no pedals, and the car would move. That was it. And at a certain point in time, they said, that's all right. But what happens is that if you got a car like this, it's very boring. Who would like to buy a car like this? And they came to the conclusion that this wasn't a car to be bought. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to give it as a service. And when they said that, somebody had thought and had made a study and said, what happens if I replace personal cars of each one of us and I provide a car service that is autonomously driven, and I put in that restriction that whenever I call for a autonomous car, it has to get in less than 10 minutes or 2 minutes. If I have a private car, how many, if I have 100 private cars, how many of these cars do I need to replace them? Well, the study says 15. Somebody said it was a lie, but all right, that's what the study says. I can replace 100 cars by 15 autonomous cars. So that's what Google tried to do, and it was working with Firefly with it. But as I said, the internal situation was very bad between Lewandowski and Ursum, was quite complicated. And at a certain point in time, Lewandowski left the company, and in August 2016, several things happened. Sometimes in these stories, things are condensed at a certain point in time. There are a lot of time when nothing happens, and then at a certain point in time, everything happens very quickly. And so in August 2016, 3 things happened that are very important. Now, the first one is that Ford and GM announced self-driving taxi services. They did it separately. What's important about this announcement is that they are validating Google's model. They don't say that they are going to sell cars that are self-driven. They are saying they are going to provide a self-driving taxi service. The second thing is that Lewandowski had left Google, so did Chris Urmson, and he founded Aurora, a company. Sometimes you write about the mission and the vision and the values. Now what did he write about the values? He said one single rule, and it says you put honesty, transparency, that kind of thing. And what he did was no jerks, he said. He didn't want to have any Lewandowskis in his life. He wanted to avoid what had happened to him before with the autopilot people, working with Tesla. The endogamy. There are very few people who know about a self-driven car in the world. And then on the other hand, Uber was a company that was feeling extremely threatened with self-driven cars because it was going after its service. It was replacing someone that was driven by someone that was not driven, and he bought Otto. Did you know about Otto? Well, no one knew who Otto was until at a certain point in time they realized who was the Otto owner. It was $600 million. Who were the owners of Otto? Lewandowski. Well, the guy of the motorbike, of the little motorbike, to $640 million. And there you have Uber's president, Lewandowski, smiling broadly. Well, they smile broadly for a very short time. In all these stories, there is always a guy that sends the wrong mail. And so someone from a LiDAR company who had to send a mail to Uber.com sent it to Google.com. And he sent it to Google.com, a specification of LiDAR. The guy from Uber said, okay, this is our LiDAR. They go to the legal department that was well trained by then, and everything ended up in a terrible suit. The latest thing that Lewandowski had done, he had downloaded 25 gig of documents. They all go up to court. All those, I mentioned Larry Page, Chris Urmson, Sebastian Thrun, Lewandowski, they are all going up to court. It was phenomenal trouble. And Tesla filed a suit to Aurora because he had taken away autopilot. So they started with the self-driven car as something glorious, and it ended up in 2016 all in court. So the story wasn't developing very well, I'm afraid. And in fact, in between, the working team went on working, particularly at Google. And I think that at that time it was 5 million miles driven by the self-driven car. Now the trouble was that Google was desperate. It was trying to accelerate processes. And so we come to 2018, May 2018, something that no one would have liked that it happened. It was the first fatal accident of a self-driven car. So they accelerated things so much that they had a fatal accident. This was a lady who was on a bike. He wasn't riding the bike. He was going to cross the pedestrian walk, and the funny thing about her bike was that the wheels of the bike were covered, and so LiDAR didn't know what it was, but 6 seconds before it detected there was something wrong. 4 seconds before, in that strange object, it detected that there was a person, and at 0.3 seconds he said that he had to have an emergency brake. But the car didn't brake. Why didn't it brake? Because Uber had taken away that control, that command, the command of emergency brake, but because there had been many false positives. So what it did was that instead of braking, it would tell the driver that it had to brake. But Google had said that that was bad and dangerous, precisely because the person takes something 10 seconds, and in fact the person who was driving at the time of the crash hadn't started braking. So that was a very bad idea. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Lewandowski is probably in jail. The president of Uber is no longer the president, and Uber abandoned Otto, the self-driven car. It had to go back brutally. It has just announced that there was going to make a process with 500 million Toyota. It's completely different, and it's not using the same code as Lewandowski, but it delays everything that it had been working on. So that's what's happening. But as I said, electric cars is a very simple car, and then what happens is there are new types of vehicles coming out. Let me tell you something that happened to me. I go to San Diego every year to attend a conference. I went there last year, and I went this year, and when I went this year, to my surprise, it was full of these little things. These are single electric single bikes from a company called Bird. They're called scooters in English. And what's the story of these scooters? Well, it's not that you are the owner of the scooter, but they have their they have a QR code. You open it with an app, and they would charge you $1 to open the QR, and then 25 cents per hour, and they move along the on the pavement, and it's full of that on the pavements. Then the question is, how do you load it? I mean, they're electric. At a certain point in time, someone has to load it. Now, what happens is that they only work in daylight. It has no lights. So what happens is that the bird company pays people to hunt birds. That's what they say. So if you get hold of a bird and you take it home and you load it, it's cents, peanuts, and then you return it to the nest the following day, the following morning, you would be paid between $5 to $20. Well, if it's easy to hunt the bird, it's $5. If it's in a neighborhood that is a little bit risky, they would pay you $20. So what's happened is a new profession. It's bird hunters. So at 7 o'clock in the evening, there are people who go out to hunt birds, and this is what they look like. This is a guy who won, who hunted a bird, riding a bird. I couldn't count the number, but he had really done quite well, and he was happy, wasn't he? So, well, what I mean is that, look here, this is a business model on top of Uber. So when we say that the collaborative economy or interpersonal collaborative, someone was the owner of the car. Now, here the owner of the scooter is Bird, and the only thing he's getting is that someone charges it. And so he has it in over 30 cities in the US at a much lower cost if he had to make the whole scheme of charging. So these are new ways of organization. As I said at the beginning, this process led to what's happening right now. And when I say now, I mean in these days. It is imminent at present that Google will launch self-driven taxis in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, it forgot about that little egg. They decided that little egg wasn't a good idea. General Motors had presented something, Ford had presented something, but it wasn't Chrysler Fiat. Now, Google went up to Chrysler Fiat and proposed a business. And I'm going to buy 60,000 Chrysler Pacific. And Chrysler said, I'm delighted. And so what Google's got is 60,000 Pacific Chryslers. In the U.S., there are 265,000 taxis. Now, Google already has 60,000. It's working in Phoenix, Arizona, but it's working without charging. And that's why I say now, I mean these days, they are going to start charging. Now, a very important detail here is that this self-driven car needs a perfect mapping of the city before. It's not that I bring down here this Pacific Chrysler of Google and I make it drive in Montevideo. It needs a perfect mapping, centimeter-wise. That's why the deployment is taking some time. But anyway, what I said, and that's why it was a very big bet in 2018. There is no other company in the world being close to developing self-driven cars as Google. Now, we have Google's, and the most important accident that Google had was when it was driving at 2 miles per hour. Well, the Jaguar, the electric Jaguar was also built and it's going to be by 2020. But let me tell you the takeaways. What are the conclusions? What are my conclusions from the standpoint of technology and the standpoint of people? As regards technology, the first thing is that we are moving to a world of new types of vehicles. We can have new types. We've seen it with scooters, but we're going to have specific, specialized cars. Perhaps I'm going to have a car to drive along the 18 de Julio only, along the main street only. But now we're probably going to have more specialized types of vehicles. The second thing is new kinds of organizations. What's happening with scooters is going to happen in other areas. Software starts becoming a collaboration mechanisms as never before. And the other one is that we were thinking of a new kind of programming. I mean, jokingly, when people were asking me what is GeneXus good for, I said it's to program missiles. And now I'm doubting about that. Well, I'm so interested in this paradigm that made me change an opinion. For some time, I had been saying that I didn't want my next car to have pistons. I wanted it to be electric. I don't care now if it has pistons. What I want is that my next car can be programmed by me. And now there are 3 models in Uruguay that I can buy them and I can program them. there's a little problem that I've got. They've come home and they told me that they were never going to get on board a car that I had programmed. But well, all right, all entrepreneurs have some obstacles to overcome. So well, we're moving towards a new way, a new form of paradigm. We have to learn it. We have to dominate it, as Jodan said. Now, from the standpoint of people, what are the important topics there? Larry Page. Now, Larry Page is not a very well-known person. He's not charismatic. He has a problem in his vocal cords. He doesn't speak in public very often. But he drew 3 enormous rabbits from his hat. The first one was the Google one, then Android, and now self-driven cars. He's not the best known, not the most famous, but I respect him. And he knows how to hire lawyers. The second thing, what do we do with someone who is extremely intelligent but has no values? I think this is a clear story. We can't work with that person. And the third thing, difficult problems take time to be solved. They're not solved in a minute. Difficult problems are the interesting problems, are the ones that pay out. We have to focus on difficult problems. Genexus is always focused on difficult problems. And the other conclusion that I can draw is that, teams were functional, dysfunctional, there were wise decisions, there were bad decisions, there were fights, but at all times, there wasn't even faith, you can't do this, it was said. But there was always a constant, something that they've always done. At all times, what they did and what they had was the power of doing. They were doing things. Thank you.